So thanks, Eric, and thank you to all the speakers. It's really amazing and really a high level of presentations this morning. And it's really difficult to respond, and it's very difficult to find the common thread running through them. But that's also the strength of them, I think. The point that I wanted to make is that this project challenges us as designers and planners to look at the nuance of the islands. Because there's so many islands, as designers and planners, we tend to generalize, we tend to research, to synthesize all the information we gather, to make proposals, and to generalize. But what this project forces us to do is, in looking at so many islands, we have to look at the nuances of the particular islands. And so from a professional point of view, I find it both very challenging and also very exciting. Then, of course, I think we need to understand what it is that makes island life so distinct. Why is it that I, as an Irish person, and there's two of us here on the panel, why is it that I, as an Irish person, feel a certain affinity to the Bahamas? Partly because being an islander. But what is it about being an islander that's distinct? And sometimes it's, you know, coming from an island, you see it as a disadvantage. But what are the advantages of island life? And I think that is something that we really need to keep in mind as we move forward. And, you know, that is something that Herbert's presentation made me think about, because, you know, we often think about water as a problem, but we see water as an opportunity. And I think that's really a fundamental change of perception. I think, you know, the other point I'd like to make is that at what point do islands disappear? At what point, you know, is it not relevant anymore that we're looking at islands? And I think that in terms of the social relationships, in terms of the relationships of islands to each other, I think is something that we really need to think about. So what to do about that? I mean, I think that anthropological fieldwork is really important, but, you know, anthropologists are not very good at anticipating the future, and that's where design and planners come in, and I think that's what we can offer. So I think I will stop at that.
Thank you, Gareth. And we're going to move right to Leonard N.
Good morning. Just a little bit on our company. We're developers, finance, design, build, own, operate of solid waste infrastructure projects. By that we mean landfills, transfer stations, recycling plants, and waste energy plants. Being probably the only MIT guy here surrounded by Harvard, I'm going to start out with something fairly specific and then work up to the general. Let me say that our region of focus is the Caribbean. Sorry. This technology. Our area of focus is the Caribbean as developers of solid waste projects. Our staff experience includes building the landfill and recycling center in Freeport, and our flagship facility is in Barbados, which is a 1,000 ton per day recycling facility that's been able to divert about 50% of the tonnage that used to go into the landfill next door. So we've got those projects operating. But let me say that solid waste is probably one of the aspects of development that may impact a small island context like the EXUMAS most quickly. Anyone that's been to Cayman, Grand Cayman, will see that the first thing you see when you come into the harbor is a 150-foot mountain tall of garbage. And you know, each one of us produces an SUV or a van in volume of waste, solid waste every year. The good news is that there are lots of technologies and lots of approaches to address this. what we're thrilled about in this conference is that there's a holistic approach being taken to development. I think Dr. Thomas Hope talked about values and so on. We find ourselves as developers building these projects and operating them in a bit of a vacuum. It would be great if we could do it in a context where the community's values have been integrated into the development, and we're fitting within that. Just as an example, land use. How much land do you want to dedicate to a landfill? How much do you want to encourage people not to use PET bottles and just use reusable glass bottles? There are all sorts of micro issues, but we're very excited about the approach that we see taking place here, because it is such a holistic approach. So we have a very narrow focus on a very broad effort. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion so far. I'd just like to focus on a simple idea, in a way. I think that if we're doing a project, I think that my view is that the answers are within. I think the important point is asking the right question. I was particularly struck by this, by my visit to Schooner Bay yesterday, and seeing how the particular characteristics of the site inform the design. In fact, and hearing the story about the sort of original workshop that took place, and in a way discarding the master plan when the evidence on site actually demonstrated that it wasn't the viable solution. I thought that it was really sensitive. It was very, very interesting, and I think that these issues are extremely complex, and whether it be the EXUMAS or any other project, I think that we can see it, on the one hand, we can see it as a genome problem because it has a very, very high level of complexity with many variables. On the other hand, probably not all those variables are of equal value or of equal merit. So what we like to try and do is focus on a smaller number of variables, the ones where you have knowledge, where you have information available that can significantly help to inform a process. These are almost certainly multidisciplinary, and I think that is an interesting point. You need to involve many different disciplines, professions. I think they need to be able to help to bring their piece, their information. One of the problems that we've got, I think, as both academics and professionals, is we spend our time developing people with very, very strong individual levels of technical specialism. Combining them together to address these complex issues is extremely difficult because they do not have enough common understanding to be able to address the issues. So I think what we need to address this is more people that have a very strong element of technical knowledge, but actually a broad spectrum of knowledge as well. Because it's only if we have that, then actually are we able to address those levels of complexity. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Patrick. Actually, I think I have some good news and bad news. The good news is that what we're discussing this morning is very common all over the world. The same questions that they were asked here today, the same things that they were posed by the government are very, very similar to what we hear everywhere in much more populated places, on islands and non-islands. The bad news is that nobody has the answers, because basically there is a fundamental problem here that we have to face. This fundamental problem is that we get more and more every year, and the resources on the planet are not enough, and basically we're not talking about sustainability, we're talking about our own survival. And we have to face it like this, and it was never more telling when in one of the research seminars we had at Harvard, someone mentioned that we have to kill the mosquitoes because the mosquitoes carry a particular disease, and our way of thinking about sustainability is kill the mosquitoes because this is bad for the population of humans. So having said that, I don't believe I add anything more to solving the problem, just making it more difficult. And I would simply say that we have to look at an integrated approach. We have to use technology up to the point that technology can allow us to do things. The presentations this morning were very, very telling. Climate change, yes, it's a very, very serious problem. Both in terms of how we handle it for adaptation, but also what we're doing that we cause climate change. Unfortunately, climate change is not seen the same way all over the world. I see that everybody blames the others for causing climate change. Nevertheless, all of us, we have to deal on how to handle it, especially in places of low rise above the sea level, like here. Water is a major, major issue. We are spoiled that we throw away the water we're using. We don't see that water is like blood. It carries the nutrients, but can be reused. And in our own bodies, it's being reused all the time. We have to use water the same way. We have to reuse it. We have to drink it very many times. We have to make sure that we recycle it the proper way, and yes, we need energy, and we have to harvest more energy from the natural resources on the planet, renewable energy. So this is where some temporary solutions are going to be found until the planet is completely crowded. And then, I don't know, hopefully we're not going to be living at that time, so it's going to be a little late. The other thing is that what you presented this morning about the Perry Institute it's really fundamental. We have to understand the past. We have to study from the past. And I'm going to talk more about these things on some specific research we do at Harvard about similar issues. They may appear a little different, but they're very similar. So I'm going to talk more in the afternoon. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks. I want to make 3 points. The first is really about the multidimensionality of sustainability initiatives. And this is something that really comes out of the full range of talks that we heard this morning, that you cannot talk about environmental sustainability without talking about issues that are socio-political, that are economic, that are cultural. And I think that's fundamental, that as we begin to think about moving forward and about what kinds of plans and structures that we begin to imagine, that we have to take into account that we need to address issues of the social and of community and of education and of public health. I think this is something that we saw a bit in Joyce's presentation. I think we need to address issues that are about cultural sustainability, that are about cultural issues, that are about function, and as Herbert was talking about, beauty. And I think this afternoon we'll hear a little bit more about the importance of culture and design as we move forward. And we need to talk about economic sustainability as well, that you cannot just purely preserve an environment or talk about environmental issues without talking about the economic mechanisms that are going to be in place to support those initiatives moving forward. And so that's my first point. My second point is a challenge. I think that in many ways we need to find or figure out ways to marry up the management structures that will be carrying forward the plans that are put in place with our new understandings of the science of the environment and ecology. Many of you know that the last 20 years there's been a radical shift in terms of how ecological systems are considered. 50 years ago, scientists thought of environmental systems as static or trying to achieve a steady state condition, whereas now we know that the science says that ecosystems are always in a state of change or fluctuation. Right now, most of our management structures are set up to control natural processes. And we really need to find management structures that can talk about adaptive management strategies that can deal with these conditions of dynamic and change over time. And so I think that's a challenge, and as Spiro says, this is a challenge not just for the Bahamas, but a challenge for communities and governments and nations everywhere. And the third point I want to make is that as we think about the planning and research process itself, that maybe there are more creative and innovative vehicles for research and planning that we may begin to use. I was struck this morning with Eric's talk in particular about how the Institute not only is thinking about how to bring people to the Institute to educate them and to participate in workshops on site, but how some of those research initiatives can now move out into communities. And I think this is very important. How can we have a very participatory planning process where people really get involved in workshops over a period of time so that we're getting as much information and participation from the ground up as we are expertise being brought in from other places? And how can we also think about bringing research out into the public environment? How can research and testing and demonstration projects become tools for training people to begin to take over, to build up skills, but also take on some of these new sustainable technologies that we're going to be thinking about putting in place? And so I think there's some great opportunity there in thinking about new innovative vehicles. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Chris. So, you know, we've heard thoughts that people have tried to put together based on what would have been discussed this morning. And now we're going to invite anyone else that has a question or comment to come forward. You know, as we look at what's happening in other islands in the Bahamas, we realize really quickly at the National Trust how important the initiative that's being advanced by the minister, i.e. Making sure that development outside of protected areas, and especially those on the borders of protected areas, is done sensibly and sustainably. I mean, we have a wonderful opportunity, again, not to keep going back to Schooner Bay, but it is something that we have all been very encouraged and impressed by. But Schooner Bay is a development on the park, and on the border of the park with respect to its reach for Bahama parrots, which live in the Abaco Park. And when I saw the proposal, I thought either Keith or Orrin had lost their mind, because they have left prime property, prime real estate that has been left in its natural state, green state, in trees as a flyway for Bahama parrots. And so really what happens outside of these protected areas is extremely important. And as we develop our country, we have to keep that in mind. So we'll invite any questions or comments from the floor, suggestions. There's a mic in the center, so if you have comments, we would really appreciate questions.
Actually, let me say something that probably we should say. Although the problems are common, the answers to those problems are very specific to every area. So this is what makes things more complicated. And following this wonderful presentation about water, recapturing water, and so on, I just want to bring more as a lighter note here, that when I was working in Denver, Colorado, you're not allowed by law to do that, because if you capture the water, then the water does not go down the river and deprives Arizona and the areas downstream. And that is very serious, even to the point that the green roof on a building was challenged at the legislation, that you should not do a green roof because the green roof deprives the water from going downstream. I want to use this as an example, that although the Bahamas are facing very common problems, the answers to what you face here may be different than other places. And this is where you really need some, actually I would say more research approach, which is that you have to be open-minded and think out of the box. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gail Charles. My question has to do with population. How does sustainability connect with population growth? And is population growth a major problem for sustainability? Can the planet and our resources sustain the level of population growth?
Eric,
Something.
you want to take another question first, Eric, or do you want to have an answer done?
You want to just do one at a time?
Since you're there, we'll take your question.
Okay. First of all, I also share the view that we had some very interesting presentations this morning. What I think I heard, or what I think I didn't hear clearly enough, however, is what are the opportunities in our own environment to innovate. I haven't heard anyone talk about innovation. In particular, we've had a couple of points made about water resources and the issues addressing the water challenges in our region, the issues related to how do we harvest water and whether we go back to rainwater harvesting, which is something that was encouraged previously, but that is no longer government policy. But I haven't heard enough about innovation. How do we innovate? Or how do we make those best practices that already exist in the EXUMAS and across the Bahamas? Schooner Bay has been used as an example. Minister DeVoe spoke about the design that we traditionally use. How do we make those things and improve them in a modern context? But more particularly, I want to hear about what do we do to innovate to make sure that we do have sustainable communities well into the future. And I think that when we talk about the EXUMAS, it's actually a very good case in point to look at what is primarily an urban environment but has potential to expand quite rapidly. And we have also, in the scope of the EXUMAS, changes from very small islands to much larger community, and also from what would be individual homeowners on an island to what is Ocean Bight or the Sandals property. And I want to hear something about innovation. How do we innovate? Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So we're going to have Len, you want to finish discussing Gail's point about population and its interface with sustainability?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's an area that's not discussed sufficiently. I can't think of a variable that drives environmental problems more directly than population. I like people, I like myself, I like my family, but the truth is that each of us has an environmental impact, a significant environmental impact on any context that we live in. And so, the level of sophistication in the way you deal with the environmental issues, solid waste, wastewater, et cetera, has to go way up as the population density increases. That's been our experience, especially in island contexts where it's critical, where you don't have, 1 million acres of hinterland to play with. You've got to take care of it right there in most cases. This is my perspective.
I think as planners and designers, I think we can only cope with it at the scale that we ourselves have power to influence. So for me, when we work at a city scale or at a community level, you need to plan that. You need to look at your population. What is a sustainable population, and that covers the different spectrums of population, employment, of social aspects, of economy, and so I would suggest if you can solve that at the individual level, I think it will largely look after itself. I think we're not in a position to address something on a global scale, and I couldn't for one moment see political consensus at that level. But I think if you address it at the level that we can control, that we deal with, then I think we will be able to bring a certain level of equilibrium, however unstable it may be from time to time.
Actually, let me say that there is no answer to your question about population. Definitely you cannot control population, at least in measures that they are not democratically acceptable. So the answer is going to be only in the short term or medium term, which is going to be enough for our lifetime. But basically, there are some answers to that, and this is that you have to increase density, you have to reduce the use of energy, and at the same time, you should not look at the American model. Because what happens is that as I travel all over the world and I propose different solutions, people tell me, we want to live like Los Angeles. We want to have more cars. And when I say no, I become quite unpopular because they want to be like us, and this is wrong. So you have to learn from what we have learned from countries like the US, to be in the short term a little more constrained. And at the same time, remember that the most environmentally friendly city in the US is New York City. Why? Because of the density, because people don't have cars, because they use less energy, although they have quite a good life. So we have to start thinking like this. Of course, this is going to create problems. It was suggested that we should exclude tourists from going to certain areas, or we should control. Actually, this is along a slippery slope that we start segregating population, and we start segregating among those who have the right to go somewhere and those who do not, which is the right of every country to impose it, of course. But what we see as part of urban planning is that we see that the whole issue of security and segregation starts becoming very much in the center play, although governments do not want to acknowledge that, but they ask us more and more to create gated communities for the haves to separate them from the have-nots. So these are really serious sociological issues, and I would say that urban planning and planning of the EXUMAS as well has to be seen together with socio-anthropology and the economists and the environmentalists at the same time. You cannot separate those things anymore. And definitely it's not technical issues. Yes, very good.
I also think, relative to this question of innovation, that we very much need to look at a broader spectrum of the systems that are in play here. We need to look beyond just the element or the system or the productive system that we're dealing with. In this morning's presentation on waste systems and septic systems, we saw examples of systems, emerging systems that were becoming more efficient, and yet still had waste products that weren't really being dealt with. I think of the reverse osmosis system where you have an output of some very salty brine. I think of the septic system where there still is effluent that passes out. My question is, how can those discharges, outputs from the system, be thought as inputs to other systems? Or how can we create systems that are more circular? I'll give you one very, very simple example, which may not be too unfamiliar to some of the folks here. This example is in Milwaukee, where an aquaponics installation was set up within an old warehouse. And it's both aquaculture, where fish, tilapia, are being raised, but also fruit and vegetables, or specifically vegetables, lettuce is being raised. And the system that's set up there is that the fish produce waste, which is then used to fertilize the plants within the system and allow plants to grow. The plants then filter out the waste from the system and actually cleanse the water to then support the tilapia. And so you have a nice system that's set up where loops are being closed, where there isn't as much discharge being put out. And so I think there are some creative and clever ways that we can begin to redirect resources to more productive ends. I also think more generally we need to find ways to support a culture of experimentation and research. And of course, part of this involves outreach and education.
So
And Philip, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make a sort of a quick remark on the question on population and sustainability, because I think it's a problem insofar as there's a cultural problem with sustainability, because carbon footprint of population is not consistent throughout the world. So if we think about the average American or the average city in the Persian Gulf, for instance, their carbon footprint is much, much higher than, for example, a tribe living in the Amazon. So these are kind of relative questions, and I think it's only the solution is a cultural solution in how we behave. So I think that is something to keep in mind. In terms of the question on innovation, I don't want to put too much pressure on the afternoon speakers, but the emphasis in the afternoon is on, as you'll see, it will be on innovation and research. So, thank you.
Take that one. On innovation, I think that there is a view that, and it's been conveyed by many professionals, that there are some universal solutions that we can take from around the world and apply everywhere. And to some extent, our KPI systems of LEED, of BREEAM, encourage that view that you can take those systems, you can apply a common standard, and they will be equally applicable in Chicago and Barbados or Bahamas. It doesn't work like that. It can drive you to take, I think, disturbing decisions regarding system selection. I think that I mentioned earlier that the answers, and I think that the innovations are actually likely to be here. I think the solutions will have to be found that are appropriate, and that's why the research proposed by the GSD, by Harvard, to assess some of the issues associated with EXUMAS, or the Bahamas in general, I think they are likely to inform solutions which will be very appropriate to here. They may not be appropriate to elsewhere unless the conditions, and that is environmental, social, technological, etc., are similar. So I would suggest that almost certainly those will be found here and appropriate to here. And that's why the particular research that is being embarked on, it could be highly relevant here. And that's where the local population can really engage. I don't think porting some of the solutions that we have tried and sometimes succeeded in elsewhere will be appropriate.
Thank you. Stacy, you have a question, comments?
Yeah, my name is Stacy Mutri. I've been working in the Bahamian environment for the past 16 years. What I wanted to know is, how is this project going to integrate Bahamian architects, planners, engineers, scientists who have put forward some of the very same ideas that have been discussed in the presentations this morning, but have not been able to get much traction in seeing those ideas actually implemented on the ground. And the reason I think it's important to have those people engaged is to have transfer of knowledge both ways. From you to them as well as from them to you, so that this isn't purely an academic exercise.
So one of the things that we, when we started looking at this process, everyone involved realized quickly that we had to make sure that there was a component that involved interaction with Bahamians. And also, it was also immediately recognized when we were discussing this with some of the government and others involved in funding this process, was that it was not going to be a quick process that brought in a few experts and they did a presentation or two, and then we evolved the plan. The first thing is we are going to have interns, and I'm really glad to see some of the Bahamian students who are actually in universities who registered and are here today. We're also going to involve students from the College of the Bahamas as interns in this process. And there will be forums organized as we go forward with this planning process to make sure that there is an opportunity for Bahamians, professionals, to inform, guide, participate, benefit from the process. So the discussion that starts today leads towards a lot of the things that you've pointed out, because certainly that was some of the things that Lynn Gape and I put forward as we started discussing this and writing a project proposal, is that we had to make sure that there was an effective way to involve Bahamians in all aspects of this process. After all, this is a process that is designed to develop a model, per se, for developing land use plans to support Bahamian legislation, and as such, we have to have the benefit of Bahamians who have been involved in this process, and that will be written into and guaranteed to be a part of, what we do going forward.
Good morning. My name is Michael Major from the Department of Physical Planning. I was quite happy with the fifth panelist who indicated that when we look at the issue of sustainability, we must look also at the social, economic, political, and the cultural issues as well. And then also, too, in terms of the management system that we have set up here in the Bahamas, and I guess in some other places, where these systems are basically to control rather than to manage change. My experiences with the Family Islands and also extended to EXUMAS is that one of the critical issues that we will have to face is the implementation of the strategy. Managing or realizing the expectations of the local population as compared to tourists and the foreign investor. And there are many issues, especially in terms of economic development, that we must consider, the benefits that, or the expectations that the local persons have as opposed to and compared to the foreign investor. EXUMAS is just one of those areas. We just this week, we've dealt with issues in the Berry Islands in terms of economic development, in terms of what the local populations expect. Is the tourism economy. The local population does not feel that they're actually benefiting from those opportunities. It's dominated by the cruise ship lines. So if they're not really benefiting in that sense, so when the effects are trickle down, they cannot afford the housing, which means that they can't enter the average housing market, let's say. So we have to, as planners, and the planning department have to then provide ways that they can accommodate housing, much denser housing, cheaper housing, and so forth. So we're managing change from external change and change that are necessary to make sure that our population has proper housing, economic opportunities. So I'm just wondering, commenting that I hope that enough focus is placed on the management of change in EXUMAS as well as the Family Islands, and to make sure that we account for the system that we now have in place with our local government, which has just been in place, I think, for 1996, fairly new, always changing. And the process we have now, which is basically, I would say, top-down, doesn't work. Bottoms up, or local government, I think it's not working as it should. So we're going to have a real problem with how we implement any strategies we have. Thank you.
May I take this? Just, I would like to ask you before you go, are you convinced that this change is good for the local population?
In most cases, no.
No. Are the stakeholders only the local population, or it's a greater area of Bahamas?
The broader.
It's a broader.
Yeah.
So I think these are the two things that you have to address your question. First, you have to be convinced and make it so that they also benefit. And second, bring all the stakeholders and make sure that the entire population benefits. If the entire population does not benefit, probably it's not a good project. And of course, I don't know anything about the project. I just judge from other projects. So people want to be explained. So management here, it's not only communication, it's go to the real issues and make sure that you deliver what you promise to deliver. Otherwise, things are going to go off track. And again, I know nothing about your project. Probably it's a wonderful project, and I should not judge on that. I just judge on other cases. And this is, again, a very common concern, that the immediate beneficiaries are not the ones bordering the project. Actually, they may be losers in the short term.
Yes.
So what are you going to do in order to bring them up?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Henry Hepburn, local architect and planner. I would just like to piggyback on what the young lady stated just before I came up. And she basically took my comments because I wanted to find out where our local architects, yes, and planners in this whole process. I do want to thank everyone for putting together the this conference, because I do think it's very important and timely, because we here in the Bahamas, yes, are going to be impacted quite severely with regards to climate change and what's happening in terms of the environment, global environment. But I heard the Prime Minister comment in terms of capacity in this area. We do have some local planners, and we do have architects. We have quite a number of architects. And I am rather disappointed while I hear Mr. Carey say that, yes, he's going to have some interns come in, and then he will have some professionals, you know, involved. Where are the professionals this morning? Where are our people this morning? Where is the College of the Bahamas? The College of the Bahamas is presently embarking upon a small island sustainability institute, okay? And we're looking at trying to do the same thing that you're talking about here. Now, I'm wondering, yes, I heard that you have some funding for this. Why isn't some of that funding being passed on? Or why isn't the college immediately, and professionals immediately involved, not at the tail end, because that's what's normally happening here in the Bahamas. We get involved at the tail end. Okay, the foreign investor comes in, he or she has his plans. It's all set. We come in at the tail end, and they want us to stamp, which we do not do. Well, some of us, I should say, okay? Because we have a problem with some of our professionals, okay? But we need to be involved at the beginning, not at the end. So I'm disappointed to see, I don't see any, well, with the exception of Eric, you know, no Bahamians. My comments, thanks.
Well, I mean, you've raised a complex question to which, I mean, first thing, today is to start a discussion. The Bahamas National Trust interacts very regularly and effectively with the College of the Bahamas. And in fact, we were quite pleased when the program, the Small Island Sustainability Program, got really well funded. In fact, it is one of the most well-funded programs in the history of the Bahamas. So we're really pleased that you have been able to attract that type of funding and you've been able to start a program. What we're doing here doesn't have any major funding. We're talking about seed funding to start a discussion. Government is committed to this process by virtue of the fact that it passed the Planning and Subdivisions Act. There was a similar planning exercise in Abaco, which Oren was involved with, and they were able to raise private funding to start that discussion, and there was involvement of a number of Bahamians in that, and in fact some of the products were produced out of that. A lot of the Bahamian architects say that they reference. Today a process starts that to get Bahamians involved is we had a discussion and we have a conference and we invited people to register. It's an open discussion that you were invited to, everybody was invited to come and make a presentation. There was a press release that went out about the conference and people were invited to register. It's a very open and transparent process. There's no end product envisioned that will involve or exclude anybody. When I went to the National Trust and we started developing management plans for our national parks, we didn't even have a template. And so we had to start the process from scratch. And that process said that we had to make sure that we are aware of and take into consideration what happens outside of a protected area if we're going to ensure long-term sustainability of that protected area. And the government's legislation, fortunately, incorporates that same type of thinking. But again, this is the first in any number of discussions, forums, workshops that will take place under this legislation. Christopher Russell is here, charged with responsibility for developing forestry management plans. So I think there's going to be any number of opportunities. In fact, there are going to be challenges in trying to get the feedback that we need for these plans. So I'm pleased that people have come to this conference, pleasantly pleased that we have so many Bahamians in the room, that we do have professionals as well as we do have students, and certainly we will be working with the National Trust. Any institution, any architect that has something to lend to the process, anyone that has planning expertise to certainly benefit and enrich this process.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Lloyd. I come from a background in sustainable tourism. I think that we're here because, well, for a number of reasons, but as a tourism destination, like Dr. Thomas Hope shared earlier, tourists contribute to a lot of the waste that we get here, a lot of our resources that the locals won't be using while we're at work. I think that in the past, many countries have made decisions where the masses, the local people, have not been involved, have not given their consent to a certain plan or a certain project. And I'm very happy for today that we did this and to get this opportunity. One of the things I really hope that we do with this is involve the public. Today is the beginning, but involving the public in more evening sessions while people are off from work to get their view, to get their stamp, to get their approval on what we should build in the EXUMAS and in the rest of the Bahamas. One thing I wanted to just mention as well, or to highlight, is that we have to think about the carrying capacity for any project that we do. I think it would mean that, like Dr. Thomas Hope shared as well, you have a higher price. You may even just have a limit for the number of tourists that can come there, of course not excluding Bahamians. So I think that carrying capacity is something that we need to consider for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you're exactly right. I mean, specific examples are there was a report years ago, and I think Mike Major would have been involved in that made recommendations for what types of development should take place on certain size islands in the EXUMAS. And he made a recommendation that this particular island, a couple of acres, should really only be for a small weekend home, single residence on a dock. Because at the time there wasn't the legislation, there wasn't the consultation, that island was approved by local government without any consultation, without any plan to guide it for a type of development which is fully out of scale with that island. And you go and you see this island and you go, why didn't someone think about it? Well, people thought about it. Michael Major, and there was the chairman of the town planning committee at the time, made a recommendation, but it fell through the cracks. So what we're trying to achieve through this process is to make sure that going forward, there is a plan, there is a process to guide a decision made either by a local government, to guide an architect who would want to do the right thing, or one who wouldn't want to do the right thing, but through the fact that you would have guidance and guidelines, can reference and see for this island, this is what is appropriate, this is what is approved, and this is what we're trying to achieve. And you're very right. I mean, we need to involve many people in this process. But, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. And even though they took a lot of time to build it, because it probably wasn't planned for sustainability, the Roman Empire fell apart. So you have to ensure that you do proper and effective planning, and that is what we're trying to start today, and everyone is definitely going to be invited to be involved. Stuart.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dion Stuart. Thanks, Eric. My question is a little bit different. I would like to know how do you see the public education and awareness component being involved in this type of project or this type of planning? I note is the sustainable future for the EXUMAS, and usually when we talk about the future, we're talking about planning for the next generation. So how will this type of planning, or from your experience, involve, say, the education at the lower-level schools, maybe the middle-level schools, the general community, the children, the next generation, in education and awareness to help integrate or to help implement a sustainable management plan for, in this case, EXUMA, but how do you see that work in your experience from the various projects that were presented before? Thank you.
And that's going to be the last question, because we do want to have lunch.
I'm quite happy to take that. I'm involved in Detroit. In fact, two of us are involved in Detroit, and there's a very interesting consultation process there. As professionals, we produce a level of documentation generally as part of our work, which is extremely good for other professionals, for city planners, etc. It's not appropriate generally as a medium to communicate with the wider public. There needs to be a parallel process that runs side by side with a planning process where consultation and engagement, a different form of language, a different form of communication, and I think the same thing should apply here. Otherwise, you will get a mismatch between the professionals and the wider public. And we definitely experienced that in Detroit. I don't know if you want to say anything about it, Chris?
Sure. Yeah, and in fact, I think there are ways that the planning process can really engage people on the ground, not just to get them excited about the proposals that are being made, but to really inform the proposals that are being made. Joyce was showing examples from New York City where communities were participating in rooftop garden installation, those sorts of things. She was also talking about these not just as a one-off, we're gonna fix the roof to make it more environmentally sensitive, but this became part of a training program that would train people within the community for this kind of occupation or employment. I think that's critical. In Detroit, what we're doing is trying to look at what are a number of organizations that are at work on the ground? How can we learn from their efforts, and how can we really build on their efforts and support their efforts? And so I think in this project moving forward, there's a lot of groundwork to be done. There's a lot of listening. I have a feeling that there are a number of very innovative solutions to how to live on islands in resource-challenged areas that are already at work here. And it's uncovering those, discovering what works from those, and then beginning to study how to scale those up. So I think part of the answer is in engagement. Part of the answer is in learning from local expertise and experience, and then really bringing that to inform some of the longer-range plans that are made.
And just to footnote that, again, echoing Dr. Thomas Hope's comments, you know, this is one of the primary vehicles, it seems to us, to incorporate the values of the community in the plan. So it's just a must.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the respondents. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'm not going to be moderating the afternoon session. That'll be someone else's headache or pleasure. So I would like to thank you all for the opportunity. And this is really an important process. The legislation, the Planning and Subdivisions Act, is really an important piece of legislation which, if properly implemented, could give very good guidance to our people existing, to our people developing businesses, to our people having wonderful lifestyles and having jobs. But it also provides the opportunity to sustain the environment while still supporting all of the things that we need to do as human beings. And so I encourage you all to continue to support this process and to provide your guidance, your input, and we will certainly make sure that it is incorporated into this process. So thank you.